Hello and welcome to Stuff and Things with Chris. I'm your host Chris. So today we're going to be doing a Now, one thing I really like about the Redbox is not only does it allow me to rent what are probably mediocre movies that I would never pay for full price in the theater, it also allows me access to movies that I might have missed when they came out due to very limited releases or I was just too busy. So these two movies, Downton Abbey and Peanut Butter Falcon, fit right into those. I wanted to see both of them. They were only on very limited theaters here in Dallas where I live, and I was really busy and wasn't able to catch them before they disappeared in favor of the monstrosities that were coming out later. So let's get started with this. So Downton Abbey the movie. Now, from 2010 to 2015, PBS had a TV show called Downton Abbey. And unless you lived under a rock or had incredibly boring conversations around your water cooler, you probably have heard of it. Now, I consider it one of the best TV shows ever. Now, it's better than Game of Thrones, it's better than True Blood, it's better than Westworld, way better than Watchmen. And what it has over those HBO shows is consistency. It stayed good for every season it existed, unlike some of those I previously mentioned that kind of went down the toilet as the years went on. Now, Downton Abbey the movie shares the same creative genius, Julian Fellowes, who wrote all the episodes for the 6-year series on PBS, and he penned Gosford's Park way back in the day, a Robert Altman film, which is also very good. You might know Julian Fellowes if you're deep into the BBC archives and you watched a TV show called Monarch of the Glen. He starred in that as one of the ancillary characters. But what he is really known for is Downton Abbey. Now, after 6 years of doing Downton Abbey, he took a break. He didn't think he was going to go back to it, but he was harangued and harassed. Every interview he did, thousands of emails, handwritten letters from fans of Downton Abbey wanting more Downton Abbey. So he caved in and he wrote this screenplay. Now the movie's directed by Michael Engler, and it picks up a few months after the series ends, back in 2015. So you have all of the same characters in the TV show. If you've seen the TV show, you're going to be very familiar with it and all the characters that are there. Now there's a huge vast of character in this movie, so it's kind of hard to go through all of them individually. So if you're not familiar with Downton Abbey at all, it is an English period drama. And so the movie sets place probably right before World War II. They don't give exact times, but it's in the early mid 30s probably. And the series follows very closely the trials and tribulations of the Crowley family and their ancestral home called Downton Abbey. Now the movie picks up right where the TV series left off in, what is that now, 4 or 5 years ago. And there's maybe a little bit of time that's passed, but they're pretty much well entrenched in this movie, and the plot revolves around King George V and Queen Mary deciding to come and stay at Downton Abbey for a couple of nights during their tour of Yorkshire. Now this sends the entire household into a panic. One of the things that makes Downton Abbey unique is that it's very good at showing you the upstairs of the house, that's the family members and all of their guests, and then the downstairs of the house. That's going to be all your servants, some of whom have contact with the family, but most don't. Maids, footmen, cooks, butler, housemaids, head of the household, etc. They all have specifically defined areas that they work in, and they've all been working in Downton Abbey for a while. They've been working there the entire length of the series, so at least 6 years. And so when the king and queen decide they are going to come to Downton Abbey, both upstairs and downstairs are sent into total chaos. There's a huge amount of work that goes in when the royals come anywhere. And that's true today also. Incidentally, in case you want some historical perspective, George V is Queen Elizabeth II's grandfather. So that's kind of the time period we're looking at here. This is before Edward takes the throne and then abdicates it, and then his brother takes the throne, becomes George VI, so who is Queen Elizabeth's father. So it's very entrenched in historical details. I mean, the way it's all put together is amazing. The best part about the TV show has to be the ensemble acting. There's a jillion actors in this, playing, you know, everybody from the count to the lowly kitchen maid, and all of them are spectacular. Now, a lot of that has to do with Julian Fellowes and the dialogue he wrote, but I cannot stress to you that if you want to watch great ensemble acting, this movie is definitely for you. Everyone in it is spectacular. So as we go along in the plot, and there's all these things they have to do to get ready for the royals, and they have to set up big parties, and they have to figure out what they're going to cook and what they're going to do, because of course the royals just don't show up. You have to invite everybody around you, and all these other lords and ladies have to show up at the house, and they have to have dinner for them, and they have to have events, and there's a parade, and it's a whole shebang. They discover about 3 or 4 days before the royal visit that the king and queen travel with their own everything. Own butler, own head of the household, old maid, their own maids, their own footman, their own cook even. So all these people from the royal household show up at Downton Abbey and proceed to start ordering everyone around who works at Downton Abbey for the Crawleys. Now, if you've seen the TV show, you're going to know that the characters in Downton Abbey are not going to put up with that kind of shenanigans. They're not going to be bossed around, and they're not going to be treated lower than low and unable to fulfill their job duties. They're all very dedicated to their job, right? So they want to keep on doing it, and they want to do it for the glory of Downton Abbey and the Crawleys. So they have a real class conflict between the servants downstairs. There's the royals who view themselves way up here, and then there's the ones of Downton Abbey who the royals view as way less. So some shenanigans ensue. Who's going to do what and when, and who's going to serve the king, and who's going to put on his clothes, and all this kind of stuff. And they get a real funny situation that kind of comes out of this, and it's pretty entertaining. I won't totally spoil it for you because you haven't seen it yet. There's also a slight, I guess you would call it, action-y subplot in this, involving an assassination attempt. That's pretty rare for Downton Abbey, and usually it's pretty much just daily life and going through and the trials and tribulations of just living in general. But this one has a little bit more action to it. It's not a huge amount. Don't get crazy. We're not going to bust into Transformer movies and stuff like that. But still, it's a little different. Gives it a little extra punch, if you will. So, I cannot recommend this movie enough. If you haven't seen Downton Abbey, this is an A all the way. Okay, it's amazing. Everything about it is great. It is picking up exactly from where the series left off. Everything that's in the series, that's amazing. The costumes, the language, the acting, the photography, the set pieces are all still there. They're all amazing. The dialogue is great. Julian Fellowes does a great job wrapping up a lot of the character arcs for all these characters. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of them, and you get a lot of really good ending to some of these arcs. So I would definitely check this out if I were you guys. Now, if you haven't ever seen a Downton Abbey episode, you're not going to be lost. Okay, they don't really refer to anything that's happened in the past, a little bit, but it's nothing really major that you can't figure out what's happening. If you are interested at all in any kind of historical dramas, this knocks it out of the park. It's also in a time period that doesn't get a lot of coverage, kind of that middle ground in between World War I and right before World War II. So that's a kind of interesting time period. There's a whole lot of changes going on in society. There's unions forming. There's people deciding that maybe they don't want to be stuck as a kitchen maid for the rest of their life, or a footman, or maybe not even a butler. And maybe there's children of the upper classes who decide, well, I don't want to just sit in the giant house and entertain people. Maybe I want to start my own business. Maybe I want to get married to somebody who's not a member of high society and just marry who I want. And so in the TV series and in the movie, they all these things are kind of going on at once. And so some of the family members of the Crawleys have a real tough time adjusting to the new changes that are going on. But overall, it's really outstanding. Cannot recommend it enough. Now, next, we're going to talk about this. Peanut Butter Falcon. Now, this is an interesting movie project. It starts from a genesis in which Tyler Nielsen and Michael Schwartz, who are the writers and directors of this movie, were working at a special needs acting camp. And one of the students at the camp, a kid with Down syndrome named Zack, came up and he was lamenting to them that he couldn't get a job in Hollywood, and he wanted to be in a big Hollywood movie. And they kind of told him, well, you know, that's going to be hard. There's not a lot of roles for special needs people, and Hollywood just doesn't really have a lot going on that with that kind of an angle. And Zack looked at both of them and said, well, why don't you guys just write one and put me in it? So Tyler and Michael looked at each other and said, okay. And the result is Peanut Butter Falcon. Now, it stars Zack, who has Down syndrome, as a kind of a biography of himself. Some of the events in the movie are things that actually happened to Zack. Now, Zack's last name is very long, and I don't want to butcher it, so I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to keep calling him Zack. It also stars Shia LeBeouf, Dakota Johnson, Bruce Dern, John Barenthal, and Thomas Hayden Church. So they got a pretty big cast for a small movie. These two, this is their first movie these guys did, Tyler Nielsen and Michael Schwartz. So, you know, that's a pretty big coup to get some actors like that in there. Now, the plot revolves mainly around Zack, who is a ward of the state when we first meet him. And because there is no place for him to go, technically, he is kind of shipped off and living in an old folks convalescent home, because that's where they had a bed. Now, at this place is where he meets Dakota Johnson's character. She plays a social service worker who works at this old person's home. And she develops a real close bond with Zack. But Zack now is older. He's in his late teens, early 20s, and then I'll actually tell you, but somewhere around there. And he wants out. I mean, he's tired of being in this place. He's surrounded by old people. He wants to go out and experience the world. So the social worker with him, she doesn't want him out there. She doesn't think he'll be able to survive. She thinks it'll be too hard for him. He's not prepared. He's not able to maintain a life outside of the old folks' home where he is. Zack is unperturbed. He tries several times to literally bust out of the place. And some of those are kind of funny. Now, Bruce Dern plays a crotchety old man who is one of Zack's friends, and they have some pretty good talks, and Bruce Dern's character helps Zack bust out. And this is when the movie really takes off, because you have Zack, the Down syndrome kid, on the lam, basically. He's out in the wilderness, and he does nothing. He's literally wearing a pair of underwear. He has no food, he has no money, he has nothing. So he's out there wandering around. The people at the old folks' home are freaking out. You know, Dakota Johnson's character is really freaking out. She's really worried about him. Zack just kind of stumbles into a dock area. And this movie's set in North Carolina. I believe it might be South Carolina, but I think it's North Carolina. And at this dock, we meet Shia LaBeouf's character, Trent. Now, Trent is kind of he's struggling a lot. There's a hint that he was responsible for his brother's death in a car wreck when Trent fell asleep at the wheel. and John Barenthal plays the brother who dies in the car wreck. But the brother held a crab fishing license, and those are very hard to come by. They're kind of handed out by county. And when his brother dies, the fishing license comes up for bid, and two other guys, or one other guy and his partner, end up taking that license. This doesn't sit well with Trent. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He's feeling horribly guilty about everything that happened with his brother. He's just kind of all over the place. He's kind of resorting to stealing other people's crab pots and gets him in all kinds of hot water. Develops a real hatred with the new people who took over his brother's fishing license. So, they corner him one day about the latest thing he's done, stealing their pots, and they beat him up. So while he's getting beaten up, Zack has just randomly snuck into a boat and laid down under a tarp. So Trent responds to getting beat up probably not the best way. He proceeds to light the attackers' crab pots on fire, all of them. So they come running out. Oh my God, you're burning our stuff up. He jumps in the boat and takes off. Now, as he's running away from the bad guys, he suddenly is confronted with the fact that there's a stowaway on his boat, and it's Zack, and Zack has no idea what's going on, and they kind of get out of that situation. And you find out later on that the fire Trent started, spread, and burned down all kinds of stuff. So it's now a much bigger issue than it was before. So that's where we start out with this plot. We then have what I guess you would call the journey of the movie, as Zack is obsessed with pro wrestling. And in particular, he's obsessed with the saltwater redneck. Now, this is a guy, a pro wrestler of some kind, and he's based in a little town in North Carolina where he has a wrestling camp. And so Zack gets it in his mind that's where he's going. He's going to learn how to be a professional wrestler, and he's going to learn it from the saltwater redneck. Now, he and Trent go back and forth about whether or not that's a good idea and whatever. Trent's just trying to make sure he doesn't get into more trouble. They eventually form a very strong bond as it goes on. Meanwhile, the social worker is still trying to catch up to him. She's kind of one step behind him. They eventually all meet together. Zack and Trent have kind of done Huck Finn floating down the rivers of North Carolina for a while. And they realize, hey, we're actually pretty close to where the wrestling school is, so let's go check it out. And this is where we introduce Thomas Hayden Church as the saltwater redneck. And of course, it's been decades since the actual wrestling took place, and so saltwater redneck says, yeah, I closed that school down like 10 years ago and it doesn't exist anymore. So now you've got the crushing defeat. And the movie goes from there into some different areas, and they kind of try to figure out what they're going to do with Zack, and what Zack doesn't believe that saltwater redneck is not real. He thinks he is real, and you get into this situation where eventually everybody kind of comes together to help Zack out. So the movie ends with some great stuff at the end. Now, this is not going to be an action-packed shoot-'em-up fest. It's not at all. This is a heartwarming kind of movie. It might be a little too sappy for some people. I didn't find it overbearingly sweet. When you make a movie with starring people and about people with special needs, you can get into a gray area. Are you exploiting them or whatnot? You don't feel like that at all in this movie. They're very careful to respect him. The other people acting with him do a great job of playing off of him. Zack is a great actor. He does a great job in this movie. It's really pretty funny. Shia LaBeouf is really the key to the movie, though. From his Transformer days, when all he kind of did was went, oh, wow, giant robot. He is spectacular in this movie. I mean, he plays a guy who has a lot of ups and downs, who's very guilt-ridden, also very hopeful. He also grows real close with Zack, so that's a great kind of camaraderie they have, kind of a buddy thing going. And at the same time, he tries to put the moves on the social worker. So, he's got a little bit of Don Juan in him, I guess you could say. So I recommend this movie. This is a good movie. It's not going to be for everyone, but if you like kind of smaller, intimate settings with not a whole lot of characters, but the characters you get are well defined and they go on a little adventure and it's kind of a heartwarming story, this will be right up your alley. Yeah, I'm going to give this one an A, so I would highly recommend it if you get the chance to see it. Like I said, I found it at Redbox, so check it out there if you get an opportunity to. So, that does it for this episode of Redbox Double Feature. Leave your comments in the comments section below. Tap the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell to let you know when I have new stuff coming out. Until then, I will see you the next time. Thanks.